Revolution Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You're back with Dave and Mecky's Shiny Side Out on Revolution Radio. You know, if you're wondering what Shiny Side Out means, it's actually the correct way to fold your tinfoil hat. But, as a disclaimer, we don't recommend you wear one. There's enough radio waves now that if you were to wear a tinfoil hat, the focal point of the concave surface would be around about your pineal gland. And let's just say that would be bad. So, don't. All right. Now, Revolution Radio is the number one listener-supported talk radio on the net. So, push the donate button and donate to the station. Buy some merchandise for yourself. The archives are free. And, get yourself something nice, a T-shirt, a mug, anything you like. And if you can't afford it, we get it. Just share it with someone. Share something that you've learned with someone else, some other like-minded people, and then if they ask, you know what, where'd you get that from? Who? What? You say, from Revolution Radio. Well, you don't listen? Oh, you got to listen to these guys. There's something for everyone. So, yes, Mecky and I think 11 years, right? So, yes, we've spoken about this kind of thing or these things. This is our style. Solaris has her style. A Mad Painter has his style and his topics. But there's so many other wonderful hosts with their own, say, show arcs or topic landscape or, whatever how you want to call it, that there's something for everyone. So do all that. This is show number 595. 590 and 500, and we are talking about, or at least today I'm talking about, Confusion of Languages, part 6. So there's another 5 parts before this one. You should find them all on YouTube or throughout the archives on the station. We do separate them on YouTube for a news hour and then a show hour for a particular show arc. And, it isn't difficult to find it. We've kind of made it easier. We did first try doing all this on a website, but then the website fees are nuts. You can just do it all in different places, and what we're going to probably do is put together all of the show notes into like an almanac and sell that as a, hopefully if people would still buy it, I don't know. Maybe put it together. And for the most part, it's a good resource if you're trying to learn about a single topic, because we've done hundreds of hours of research or more, certainly sometimes in, like tens of decades of research. And it's a quick shortcut to get to where we are. So we've published some show notes on our website, but like I said, we haven't updated the website for a long time. The application allows us to do that. Has crashed and we can't get it. That's actually supplied by the vendor who looks after our website. So we're still kind of looking around. We have a history of everything we've done, and that body of work is pretty big. And we've put together a documentary series, at least in 3 seasons worth of material. And we would hope that someone could or would find inspiration in how we present the material, and at least how we might do it for, a 22-minute half an hour piece or a 44-minute hour-long piece edited for, TV, for commercial TV. So that would be really nice if we could do that, and if we could find one of the streaming platforms that would be willing to throw some money at us there and help out Mackie and I with our body of work. That would be nice. Really like to see that happen. Now, the topic is Confusion of Languages Part 6, and if you don't know the rest of it, the highlight reel is that when we first looked at this so crazy 9 years ago, that we could find the Tower of Babel and not the Confusion of Language, but the Tower of Babel stories. We never found the Tower of Babel, the world destruction, and the Confusion of Languages all wrapped up into one. There was no connection between those, and now there is. Now we have all three of those wrapped up into the same thing. It's kind of like Bigfoot, UAPs, and UFOs being together, and abductions, all kind of being, or missing persons, 411, all together in the same place. There's little pockets where all of those existed at once, and sometimes at the same time when there's a disappearance or there's UFO sighting, and it's someone, a Bigfoot story or something. So maybe they are connected, but at the moment it's correlation, and that's where we're going to stand with this also. But it's a surprise now to find out that they are seemingly tied together, at least if nothing else with cable ties. That's one of my go-to solve it tools, that and gaffer tape. All right, so today we're talking about quantum physics. It's up my alley, and I do like this topic a lot. And this story comes from Philip Ball, October 25, 2022, mid-COVID here. So researchers use quantum telepathy to win an impossible game. A new playful demonstration of quantum pseudo-telepathy could lead to advances in communication and computation. To win at the card game of bridge, which is played between two sets of partners, one player must somehow signal to their teammate the strength of the hand they hold. Telepathy would come in handy here, but telepathy isn't real, right? Says the author with a question mark. That's correct. For decades, however, physicists have suspected that if bridge were played using cards governed by the rules of quantum mechanics, something that looks uncannily like telepathy should be possible. Now researchers in China have experimentally demonstrated this so-called quantum pseudo-telepathy, not in quantum bridge, but in a two-player quantum competition called the Mermin-Perez Magic Square, otherwise known as MPMS game, where winning requires that players coordinate their actions without exchanging information with each other. Used judiciously, quantum pseudo-telepathy allows the players to win each and every round of the game, a flawless performance that would otherwise be impossible. The experiment, conducted using laser photons, probes the limits of what quantum mechanics permits in allowing information to be shared between particles. The work is a beautiful and simple direct implementation of the Mermin-Perez Magic Square game, says Arul hang on a minute, this has got like 12 syllables. Lakshmin Aryan of the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, who was not involved in the experimental demonstration. Its beauty, he adds, comes in part from the elegance in confirming that a quantum system state is not well defined prior to actual measurement, something often considered to be quantum mechanics' most perplexing trait. These quantum games seriously undermine our common notion of objects having pre-existing properties that are revealed by observations, he says. Two quantum physicists, Asher Perez and David Merman, independently devised the MPMS in 1990. Oh, by the way, the perplexing quantum world, where is Einstein quoted it and left it alone like the plague. He's quoted as saying spooky action at a distance, and that's where he left it because his macro physics didn't work in this in the quantum world. I continue with the text. It involved two players called Alice and Bob. As is tradition in quantum mechanical thought experiments, who have to fill in a magic square, a 3x3 grid of numbers, with each grid element being assigned the value of 1, or like +1 or -1. In each round, a referee, Charlie, sends at random a row to Alice and subsequently a column to Bob. There are 9 such row and column combinations. The players have to tell Charlie which values of + or -1 to put in their 3 grid spaces. As with many magic square challenge, such as Sudoku, the sums of each row and column must meet particular constraints. Here, the product of all the entries in a row must equal +1, and the product of all the columns must be -1. Alice and Bob win a round if they both assign the same value to the grid element where the column and row overlap. Now that's interesting. Classically, it's impossible to win all rounds because even if Alice and Bob guess well each time, there is inevitably one round for every completed square where the assignations must conflict. The best they can do is to achieve 8 wins out of every 9. Now I'm just going to do a shot here, middle screen. So those, let's call it playing at home, those watching this on YouTube, can get a grasp of what it means. So the game involves 2 players, Alice and Bob, where numbers in a magic square. I've read all that. So now take that back off again, and I'll continue. Now the credit for this piece goes to Lucy Reading Ikander, or Reading, hyphenated Ikander. But now suppose that Alice and Bob can use this quantum strategy. Instead of assigning each grid element a value of +1 or -1, they assign it a pair of quantum bits, or qubits as they're known, each of which has a value of +1 or -1 when measured. The value given by each player to a particular grid element is determined by measuring the 2 qubit values and finding the product of their pair. Now the classical conflict can be avoided because Alice and Bob can elicit different values from the same 2 qubits depending on how they make their measurements. I'll explain quantum in a minute. There is a particular measurement strategy that will ensure the winning criteria for any given round, that all the products of Alice's and Bob's 3 entries, are +1 and -1 respectively, are met for all 9 permutations of rows and columns. However, there's a wrinkle to this strategy. However, to make the right set of measurements, Alice and Bob need to know which of their 3 grid elements is the one that overlaps with the other player. They need to coordinate. But in the MPMS game, there is no problem because they make their measurements sequentially on the same 3 qubit pairs. This means that their pair reaches Bob has an imprint of how Alice has already measured those qubits. They can transmit information to each other. That's crazy. I'm going to do middle screen again so you can see this crazy outcome. So I'm just going to pause for a sec. So the quantum world is pretty much, if I bowled, let's just use 10-pin bowling. So if I bowled a ball down, it could even be with my own eyes shut. I was a good bowler, but, you know, it's still going to be random where it's going to be at any given time. If you wanted to, within the known speed of the ball that was most predictable from me, at any time you couldn't quite predict where it was. The distance from me to the pins, probably you get very close, but the width across the lane, not so much, because that part is still going to be random. So you use probability to narrow it down to where it would be most probable. Only opening your eyes would determine where it was. And so the observation changes from the calculation to what's real by simply looking at it. But in terms of the double slit experiment, which, you know, if you learnt it at school, you should be very fortunate. Consider yourself fortunate, because the double slit experiment isn't just proving that an electron is a wave and a particle. Because remember our CRTs, our cathode ray tube TVs that were super deep, were firing electrons at the screen and using magnetic fields to steer them so they hit just at the right point on the screen as they drew line after line after line after line of what seemed like continuous fire from the electron gun. Using that same tool, firing at two very small slits on a small screen that would block most of the misses, the inaccuracies, and let through the two slots, then to travel downfield before it hit a phosphorus screen, for instance. If you were to fire your continuous firing single, all right, because remember, like a machine gun is not firing all its bullets at once. It's a single one fire, one fire, one fire, one fire, one fire, one fire. So at any given time, there's no bullet overtaking another. They're all in a linear form, flying downstream away from you, I expect, unless you were silly enough to fire them above you. That would be very dangerous. But if you fired them at these two slots, the electrons, it can happen to either bounce off the screen or go through the left slot or the right slot, for instance, and then travel downstream and collide with a phosphorus screen, so which you would see. You would get a little bright dot, just like we did on a TV. So it was phosphorus coated front screen, and we saw the same thing. The magic of this is, I wonder which slot they went through. I don't know. It's really hard to tell. They're close together, but I wonder. So the pattern on the wall of phosphorus firing single electrons through a single slit paints a single slit on the wall further down past the slot. But when you have two, it has multiple brightness fading to the outside of an interference pattern where the wave hit both slots, then interfered with itself, creating an interference pattern of high troughs and high peaks and low troughs. And where a trough and a peak match, it nullifies itself. That's just how that works. And so then you get these painted lines, more than two. There could be 12 lines, but they fade out as they get further away from center. So The weird part about this experiment is if you look to see which slot the electron flew through, then immediately it goes to 2 painted slots on the wall. I'm just going to rest there for a minute. This is like base camp if you're climbing up to Everest, to climb over all the old dead bodies and the oxygen cylinders and camping equipment. So just by observing it, it changes the outcome. I mean, it literally changes what's on the screen behind. And how can just attempting to measure which one it went through stop it from being a wave and force it back to a particle again? It's as if the universe is, these aren't my words. Like I suppose I would consider myself kind of clever, like a problem solver. And when I look at this, I'm baffled around what we were taught, and they skipped all of this. Too hard. You don't need to know anything more than that. Right? It's like the old woman in Hansel and Gretel. She was going to push you in and eat you, push you into the oven and cook you, and then eat you for some reason, which was never described in any depth. But the take home was, don't go inside strangers' houses, right? Because bad things can happen. Now, granted. Well, if you look at this experiment, you will see that just by trying to work out which slot it went through, it interrupts, or let's call collapses, the probability of it being a waveform back into a particle, and therefore forces its hand, and it has to render it the way that we expected to see it. Because I'm one of those proponents that believe that we are living in a simulation, like a video game. It only renders what it needs to render, and if you're looking at it, it'll render it the way that your expectation is. In a universe that would be virtual, then there's no need to render it. It's still a probability, and when it hits as a probability, it's a wave. See how crazy that is? I think we're all kind of lucky that there wasn't a double slit in a CRT screen. Otherwise, we'd never have television. It would just be, we would never have got there. Right? Anyway, so that's what really bugs Einstein about it. It's more than 100 years old, and they still haven't come up with a reasonable answer as to why it does it. Why does it change? And for everyone listening, and anyone on YouTube, for instance, and this is not me saying this is the physicists around the world have said there's a Nobel Prize in it if you can say why and mean it. This isn't, trying to mix together the quantum equations and, Einstein's equations, relativity and anything in the quantum world. No, there's no universal theory that's going to work, because in the real world, if I throw a piano at a double slit, it's still a piano. I can't throw a piano. But if I launched it, if I shot a cannonball, it's still a cannonball. So why is an electron suddenly a wave? And if you wanted to go deeper into it, research how neon has 2 different wavelengths, but there's only, that would mean that the electron has to move between shells, and when it does, there's no interim frequency it makes, and you can see that in the light spectrum that's produced to make the neon color. There's two colors, but there's no interim color. There's no crossing from one to the other. It's either there or it's here, that defies logic too. Anyway, back to it. So good old credit to Lucy Redding Ikander continues and says, in 1993, Merman showed that the MPMS could be used to demonstrate a quantum phenomenon called contextuality, first identified by the Northern Irish physicist John Stuart Bell in 1966. Contextuality refers to the fact that the outcome of a quantum measurement may depend on how the measurement is done. A set of classical measurements in a system will give the same result no matter what sequence those measurements are performed in. But for quantum measurements, this is not always so. In the MPMS, the contextuality arises from the fact that the measurement for a given qubit pair may give a different result depending on which other two pairs are being measured to. But what if we forbid any communication between in the MPMS by assigning Alice and Bob different qubit pairs and saying that they can't confer about how to measure them? Then each player can only be guaranteed 9 out of 9 wins if they make the right guesses about what the other player does. But in a study published in 2005, quantum theorist Gilles Brassard of the University of Montreal and his colleagues showed that the players can use quantum principles to guarantee a win in every round, even without communicating, by using what they called quantum pseudo-telepathy. Remember, this is about confusion of languages, and our belief, Shiny Side Out's belief, that the single language we had before was telepathy, and therefore we didn't have a spoken language per se. Back to the text. This strategy involves entangling one of each of the 2 qubit pairs sent to Alice or Bob with a corresponding qubit used by the other player. So basically they're entangling both pairs that each person has with each other. Entangled particles have properties that are correlated. So if Alice measures the value of a particle, this fixes the value for Bob's particle too. 2 entangled qubit particles could be anti-correlated. For example, if Alice's qubit is found to have the value of +1, Bob's must be -1. There is no way of saying which value Alice's qubit has before it is measured. It could be +1 or -1, but Bob's will always be the opposite. Importantly, a property entangled between pairs of particles is said to be non-local, meaning that it is not local to either particle, but rather shared between both. Even if the particles are separated by vast distances, the entangled pair must be regarded as a single non-local object. The same basic idea for winning a quantum game was proposed in 2001 by quantum theorist Adán Cabello of the University of Seville in Spain in a game he called All or Nothing, which was later shown to be equivalent to the non-local pseudo-telepathic MPMS. I'm just going to share my middle screen again for those watching on YouTube. You can zoom into that, I'm sure it's all in HD. I'm not going to bother going into the entanglements. Some researchers regard entanglement as the most fundamental aspect of quantum mechanics. It implies a kind of information sharing between particles that is key to leveraging entanglement for quantum pseudo-telepathy. Alice and Bob don't have to exchange information to coordinate their actions because the necessary information is already shared in the pairs of particles themselves. Both contextuality and non-locality provide quantum resources that can be used to gain some advantage over classical approaches to information processing. In quantum computing, for example, entanglement between the quantum bits is generally a resource that creates a shortcut to finding a solution to the problem unavailable to the classical computer. Physicists have repeatedly demonstrated Cabello's all or nothing game in the real world using entangled photons. But while those experiments established how entanglement could convey a quantum advantage by beating classical performance, Kai Chen of the University of Science and Technology in China, Jiling Wang of Nanjing University in China, and their colleagues have devised a new experiment that they say implements the full protocol to achieve a guaranteed win in every round. Genuine, consistent quantum pseudo-telepathy. Ideally, Alice and Bob would prepare many sets of 4 qubits before the game starts, each quartet consisting of 2 entangled pairs. Alice would get one of these pairs and Bob would receive the other. Making 2 entangled pairs of photons for each round of the game is immensely challenging. However, the researchers say, for one thing, the production of even a single entangled pair happens only with low probability in their apparatus, so making 2 at once would be extremely unlikely. And detecting 2 pairs at once, as the pseudo-telepathic MPMS demands, is more or less impossible for this optical implementation. Instead, Chen, Wang, and their colleagues prepared a single photon pairs and entangled 2 of their properties independently, their polarization state and a property called orbital angular momentum. The photons were contained in ultra-short laser pulses lasting just 150 femtoseconds and were entangled by passing them through 2 so-called nonlinear optical crystals. A thin slab of barium borate first split a single photon into 2 photons of lower energy with correlated angular momenta. Then they were then entangled via their polarization 2 by sending them through a crystal of yttrium vanadium compound. To demonstrate a nearly 100% success rate, the researchers needed to improve their detection efficiency so that almost none of the entangled photons escape unseen. Even then, the theoretical limit can't be reached precisely in the experiment, but the researchers were able to show they could win every round with between 91.5% to 97% probability. This translates to a reliably beating the classical 8 out of 9 limit. 1,009,610 rounds out of a total of 1,075,000. So 1,075,930 played. The pseudo-telepathic MPMS game exploits the strongest degree of correlation between particles that quantum mechanics can possibly provide. Chen says, our experiment probes how to generate extreme quantum correlations between particles, he says. If these correlations were any stronger, they would imply faster than light information exchange that a host of other independent experiments indicate is impossible. Faster than light. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to, this is my little op-ed. It is seemingly instantaneous changes between the pairs that are entangled. One showing the inverse of the other, for instance. Swapping the polarization is another. And so I dare say we'll find more coming up later. But needless to say, Merman says that while experimentally impressive, the success reveals nothing new beyond the fact that quantum mechanics works as we thought. Capello does not entirely agree. Above and beyond being an experimental tour de force, he says, the work shows a new wrinkle in what quantum rules make possible by mobilizing 2 sources of a quantum advantage at the same time, one linked to non-locality and the other linked to contextuality. Investigating the 2 effects simultaneously, Cabello says, should allow physicists to more rigorously explore the connection between them. What's more, each of these resources could, in principle, be put to different uses in quantum processing, boosting its versatility. For example, non-locality can be used for secret communication using quantum cryptography, while contextuality can be used for quantum computation, Cabello says. In this scenario, Bob could, for instance, set up a secure communication with Alex while at the same time performing a computation with Charlie faster than classical methods permit. The use of shared entanglement in these experiments leads to effects that seem classically magical. Lakshminarayan says, but given how often quantum mechanics is misused as a bogus justification for pseudoscientific claims, it is perhaps asking for trouble to call the phenomenon pseudo-telepathy. It is a bad term inviting nonsensical interpretations, Merman says. But while Cabello agrees, he recognises that evocative names can help to advertise the interest in the phenomenon. Let's not kid ourselves, he says. It's probably thanks to the word pseudo-telepathy that you and I are having this conversation. That's absolutely the case. It wouldn't have come up. So I wanted to say this, that I've said this before on my show, that if you could have 3 states of a quantum photon pairing, or at least a quantum electron pairing, then, like entanglement, then you'd be able to have 3 different modes in which 2 people could communicate with each other. So you could have synchronous communications and status as well, for instance, something like that. And where if you could change the polarization and the momentum, the angular momentum, then you'd be able to, one person communicate using one, like as in your mic to their speakers, and the other person's mic to your speakers, for instance. And then you could also have a data throughput or telemetry of some kind, right? And if you could suspend it in a magnetic field, in a mobile phone, inside a chip, having entangled them, they're entangled forever. You put them into chips and put them into phones, for instance, or, back at the base station within your telephony provider, you wouldn't need any more towers. No more towers are needed. No more, radio towers for your cell phones, because you could just have a conversation that way. And it wouldn't matter where you were. You'd always have perfect reception. Blah, 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 blah. End of story. And I've pitched that. I don't have a patent for it. And if someone makes one, please credit me. And I'd take 0.01%. And that would be enough to at least allow the product to get up, and then I could retire. Anyway, about the authors of this paper. Philip Ball is a science writer based in London. His next book, How Life Works, University of Chicago Press, will be published in the fall of 2023. Credit Nick Higgins. Now, is telepathy a universal language? All you need to know. Now, this comes from a story from June 6, 2019. If you think that telepathy is a universal language, then you might want to know more about it. There are 2 minimum scientific studies which actually explored the validity of the mind-to-mind communication wherein 2 persons exchange information with one another without using vision, touch, or even sense of hearing. The results shown promising ones of real telepathy with machine help. Now, we talked about that study earlier in last week's part 5. Telepathy research. Let me just check. Yeah, I'll get through most of this. A promising research team from Harvard Medical School, Research Institute Starlab, and Axilum Robotics came up with a study in 2014 aiming at development of a system to enable telepathic communication. The team even published a research paper on PLOS, one journal. It paved the way to reliable language translation services to some extent. The current setup of the study is unrefined, and the researchers admit that it is more of a concept proof, like we call it proof of concept, than that of any actual usable system. What researchers plan to do is convey a simple message from one person in one place to a number of others in remote areas using without the sender speaking or writing it down. Similarly, the recipient had to procure message without using sensors. The sender and recipients were used to communicate direct through brains. Looks like it's been through a translator. The setup mainly called for the use of EEG sensors, stick to scalp of person sending message, and TMS on heads of receiver. TMS is a device used in treating depression and non-invasively stimulating neurons in the brain. For the sender to receive the message, he need to learn equivalent binary codes for the individual's letters. For example, the letter H in the system has binary code of 00111. The message sender had to project message. Obviously it's been through a translator, without writing or talking. It was done by moving hand to indicate 1 or leg to indicate 0, or just spell out word as per the binary code that the research team established. The sender will write the binary code mentally for specified letter until full word can be spelt. It isn't me, guys, just saying the text is bad. For the recipient, the message is obtained as flashes of light. It is comparable of use of Morse code. One transmitted by message translates to flash of light, while 0 states blank. The recipient will see combination of blanks and light flashes to represent letters. Seeing over here does not man literal image perception through receiver's eyes of message are blindfolded. The light will flash only mentally as induced by TMS system. It will actually take around 70 minutes for sender to relay the message completely. This experiment took place between people located in multiple countries. The sending party was there in India while the receivers were located in France. The first transmitted word was hola, while the second was ciao. If you think you need language translator, then you better start working out on the telepathy first to learn more about the lot now. Telepathy research from the University of Washington. The telepathy research is not what a new approach is to explore telepathy possibility. Just a year before 2014 study, the Washington University conducted a study with similar EEG to TMS setup. Well, in place of using brain signals for generating messages and transmitting messages to brain of receiving person, the researcher used signals for controlling hand motions of another person. Here, the researcher Rajesh Rao transmitted brain signals to fellow researcher Andrei Stocko. The two were only on same campus, but signals were sent via internet. The machine aided brain-to-brain communication, making it possible for Rao to cause Stocko fingers to move on keyboard as per his intention to some extent. The research setup needs subjects to be isolated fully from one another to ensure that they do not have hints or any other reading material, the intention of message sender. The worst noise-cancelling earbuds and looking at screens with multiple images. They wore noise. One major difference of study with one mentioned earlier is that sender of brain signal does not try to make the other person take and understand the message. It is more of telepathic control than communication. Even though this setup might make other person receive a message by controlling fingers to type something onto keyboard, it will not constitute direct brain-to-brain based message transmissions. Now, what studies say? Are you in need of some professional translation firm? But before that, you might want to know what studies have said about telepathy. The neurology professor at the Harvard Medical School has stated that one of the goals over here was to develop new communicative ways for patients who might not have the ability just to speak or use any communication methods. In an interview, he stated that the team sought to improve the ways in which people might communicate as confronted with sensory limitations and articulation. In simple words, research shows that communication's possibility with someone cannot ensure use of alternative communication modes as Braille, reading, and sign language. Mute and deaf people can always opt for sign language. Those with loss of sense of sight can go for Braille. There are options to use Morse code as long as the person has one basic sense available. Applying beyond the art of basic communication. The applications of telepathy are not limited to the basic communicative ones. It can be well used in other areas like battlefield for facilitating discrete communication. Furthermore, the same service can be used in government or business negotiations to ensure sincerity. Moreover, it can be revolutionary communicative method for not just humans, but between humans and machines and animals. It can easily revolutionize the way people mix with the equipment or smart devices. It is further possible to communicate with animals to help people understand what they are saying. Still got time. Universal language. Right now, the universal language is mainly associated with English, but you need foreign language translation for some other services over here, wherever that is, don't know. English is understood by most of the people. This language is what people try to use to connect with others using different languages. Without learning the native language over ear, it says ERE, even when it is about sign language, the ASL is regarded as commonly used service. It is true to state that the telepathy can be superior to any other communicative method and can be the real universal language. Telepathic communication entails learning new language. It is more like having someone learn and use Morse code or Braille. That's because they're using EEG to TMS. Ridiculous. The setup will entails development of new system of reading and writing message, even though based on English. If you can understand the hell I'm saying, it's not my problem. It's not my fault. I'm glad you can. It's a challenge to read it without changing the words in my head as I'm speaking. And I'm just reading the obviously translated text from another language. The setup, okay, the users have to memorize binary codes for the numbers, letters, and characters to generate messages read by machine. After a few years, the researchers have to craft better system for an efficient mental generation and even message interpretation, giving rise to a new language. See, I don't think any of that is required. I think we can already use telepathy if we were trained to use it. It's like we lost the instruction manual. And anyone in the chat room, feel free to agree with me. English with alphabet form of writing happens to be the basis of new language for the telepathic creativity and message reading. It is hard to memorize extensive sets of such binary codes and mentally generate messages with the same, so the alphabet ones are more advantageous over here. The last two paragraphs. Yes. Okay, telepathy is not a perfect today. Before you come up with the answer on why hire a content writing agency, you might want to learn a bit more about telepathy first. However, you should be sure of one thing, that telepathy is not likely to be communicative very soon. There is quite a long way to cover by the researchers for that. The studies have concluded one-way communication through telepathic sections is okay. It takes a long time to generate them. Yeah, sure, granted. A system can be used to conversation remotely possible, yes. Then you also have to think about the TMS and EEG equipment, which cannot be stated. It's just not cheap. So, and there's no mobility with it. It's preposterous, the idea that we should go down that path. Communication through translation. Telepathy might have been a reality for some people, but the technology is making it even more promising with every passing day. It will take time to research and then develop the unstable scenario of the present condition. It will take some extra time to become new language or communicative system. If you want to communicate in a new language for the time being, then Tridia is the name you can trust always with your might. I don't know what that is. Don't Google it, get a list. Why? So we are able to provide you with the top-notch quality translations, interpretations, transcriptions, and of the other services designed for languages in various world parts. There is a complete network of language services providers, or LSPs, ready to help you in the best manner possible. They are further known to be the native speakers of the language where they... Well, it's an ad. It's an ad for using TRID India. Good for you. So, is telepathy a bunch of hokum, or is there anything to it? You decide. The following 3 documents were released by the CIA under the Freedom of Information Act. What I'm going to do, I think I'm going to stop there. I'm going to say that release information is going to be next week. At least where the text it was originated in English. That'll be interesting. And hopefully Meki's back on board. I don't think that you get knocked out for weeks anymore with the COVID. So when I had it, I felt absolute death warmed up. And I might have caught it when I went into hospital for my nose operation. So I am feeling much better now, but it does smell like death when I breathe in, just for those who missed the first hour. I'm going to say coming up in the next couple of hours is actually Jer Bear. Jer Bear's got a great show. It's called After Hours, and he follows on us, after us. Good on you, Jer Bear, or Jer Bear, as you probably are more correctly pronounced. One of the mainstays from the station, a mad painter, Jer Bear, Shiny Side Out, are of the original crew. So I joined the latest of all those 3 of us, and of all the other hosts, there's only a few. It's a small cluster of hosts, and we're all in the first group. Everyone else who's come and gone, all the big people that learnt just how many listeners they did have, decided to leave or moved on of their own accord. Crazy times. I'm glad that this platform is still here, and long live, rest in peace, long may he forever rest in peace, Nighthawk, Mike Ringley. I still think about him. He was the prepper who didn't know that COVID came. He died before it came. His entire mantra was about survival and preparedness and prepping for the future. And sadly, he didn't get an opportunity to undertake everything that he taught everybody else. And certainly, Mac and I, we got through it. We know what to do, and you should take all those learnings on. Hey, there's the music. Guess what? It's been another Shiny Side Out with David Mackey, and hopefully Mackey's back next week. Yeah. What more can I say? Plato's Cave is 7 a.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday and Thursday, and we'll be back again next Sunday for another Shiny Side Out. Take care, guys.